Good evening, everybody. My name's Alexander Amon, and I'm a councillor in Richmond Borough, and I'm the chair of the Transport and Air Quality Committee. And I'll be chairing this evening's community conversation on the Hospital Bridge Road. Now, before we get into the substance of the meeting, which I'm grateful for all of you joining, I wanted to just set out a few housekeeping rules. We're aiming for a hard stop at 9 p.m. We've obviously moved this meeting back to enable the previous victorious English football match that took place earlier today. And the way that we're planning on running things is that we're going to have a short presentation from David Tidley, one of the council's transport officers, and Lucy Thatcher from the planning department. We'll then follow that short introductory presentation with questions via the question and answer function. And if you can put down briefly the kind of gist of your question, you don't need to detail it word for word. I will then, as the chair, draw through that list and try and get a fair share of the kind of comments and questions that are coming through. You'll then be, when named, you'll be unmuted and able to put the specifics of your question to those assembled here. We'll do our very best, of course, to provide you with answers. Now, please do keep those questions brief. Long statements will just intrude on other people's ability to be able to get across points that they themselves want to make. We want to take as many questions on a range of subjects as possible. Points of detail or repeat questions, we will also try and deal with through written answers from the cadre of officers that are on this meeting. Via the question and answer function. So the headline questions, many of which will be addressed verbally, but some more of the detail and repetition can be dealt with through the written medium. We've got a wider array of both councillors from relevant wards and officers on this call. I'm not going to ask them all to introduce themselves because I think it will just eat into time that's better spent, obviously, with people making the points that they want to make. But when they come in, and invariably a number of them will, I would ask them just very briefly for the first time that they come in to introduce themselves. Just one brief remark from me before I hand over to David and Lucy. Broadly speaking, David's presentation that follows, I think, can be divided into three parts. I think, we recognise as a council, both at officer and councillor level, quite how strong the range of views are around the siting of the school and the history that goes with it. And indeed, you will know that ward councillors spoke against the original planning applications. Now, I do have to make clear that whatever feelings we may have individually about that application, this meeting is not intended as a rerun of those planning decisions, which are of course not made by the council's leadership, but by a planning committee and obviously the various other layers of government involved in such decision making. The second part I just wanted to say really of David's presentation is to set out the presentation is on the highways measures that have been prescribed as part of the planning conditions associated with that development. And these will be delivered by David, and we'll get an update on where we are with those various elements. And the last point, and I think the area where, while in the prior area, residents will undoubtedly have views and feedback that we can build into our thinking. The area where perhaps there's the richest vein of opportunity, I think, for resident engagement is this third part of the presentation, which is recognising that the council's leadership, the administration that run this council, want to go further still than the planning conditions associated with the development. And supported by your ward councillors, we don't see the planning conditions as job done. And those further measures, whether in the shorter term or in the longer term, are very much things that we want to hear feedback about, because at this stage, a number of options have been looked at and analysed, but no firm commitments have been made to the specific pathway that we should take. And we want to do that with residents so that we have a sense of what will have that level of support and therefore be sustainable. So David, I've said enough, over to you, and if you could take us through the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Councillor. And just to introduce myself, everybody, I'm David Tidley, the Transport Strategy Team Manager for Richmond Council. So next slide, please, Jamie. So what I intend to cover today, and along with colleagues, are several things, as Councillor Raymond has said. We will update you on the school delivery. I will touch on the school transport obligations and the highway works necessary to make the scheme acceptable. And I would say at the outset, this has been a particularly challenging development to work on. Then we will cover council proposed works at Nelson Road, Hospital Bridge Road Junction, as Councillor Raymond says, to go further, and also to discuss some potentially longer term ideas and options, and to seek any views that residents have on those. And so we'll come on to that later. So next slide, please, Jenny. And at this point, I'll just hand over very quickly to Lucy to run through where we are with Lucy Thatcher, to run through where we are with the actual school delivery.
Thank you, David. Yes, I'm Lucy Thatcher. I'm the Strategic Applications Manager in the Planning Department at Richmond. So just really as an update and a recap, so following the lengthy planning committee back in 2019, where there was extensive questioning and discussion, and the committee decided that whilst the application for the new school presented a difficult balance of priorities, the benefits did outweigh the harm, and the school was granted planning permission. The planning committee found that the potential harm arising from the development could be mitigated by the use of planning conditions and obligations that secured highway works and improvements, but only as needed for the school rather than to address existing issues. And I think this is an important point to raise and relevant to tonight's meeting. Local planning authorities can only secure obligations and conditions that meet the stringent tests set out by governments. And if the local planning authority try to go beyond those, to what is necessary to mitigate the impact, the decision could potentially be unlawful and challengeable. It is also of relevance that the resolution made by the Planning Committee was supported by the Greater London Authority and the Secretary of State, both of which did not wish to intervene and were content that the application be decided by the local planning authority. Thanks, Jenny. So where are we now? As you all are aware, the school is well under construction. All the pre-commencement conditions have been submitted and determined. Currently, the local planning authority are awaiting the submission of pre-occupation conditions. It is understood that the school is hoping to occupy the site in the February 2022 half-term or Easter 2022 as a fallback date. The details associated to the pre-commencement conditions will need to be submitted and approved prior to this occupation. When the application was originally heard by the Planning Committee requested that condition NSO7, which is the car park and access management arrangements, be referred back to the Planning Committee for decision. The applicants are currently aiming for the details associated to this condition to be submitted in mid-July. The details will solely consider the management arrangements for the access and car park, including, for example, the number of staff, hours of operation of the plan, and roles and responsibilities. Thanks, Jenny. And just really to touch on some parking matters associated to the new school. As outlined in the original committee report, the school is expecting 90 full-time members of staff. The local plan, the development plan, sets out maximum parking standards for different land uses. And for schools, this is 1 space per 2 members of staff. Therefore, as a maximum, the school could only provide 45 on-site spaces. In this instance, the school opted to maximise the provision they could do and provided those 45 spaces. It is also worth noting Transport for London originally objected to the level of parking and recommended this be reduced. However, in response to its low public transport accessibility, offers recommended that the maximum standards were met, and this also reduces any impact on the street. Whilst it is recognised that the school sits outside the Whitton South CPZ and most of the surrounding roads are uncontrolled, it is worth acknowledging the school has an excellent track record for its travel plan. When the application was assessed, the travel plan had gold accreditation, and the council has secured obligations requiring the travel plan to be submitted annually for review to ensure sustainable travel is promoted and maximised, and vehicle trips and impact upon on-street parking be minimised. As I understand, there's been no applications being received from the school for parking permits to park in the CPZ. Thank you, Jenny. And back to David.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. So now I wanted to cover some of the transport-related obligations. And I think possibly just before I do, I'd make the point that the highway is, it doesn't stand still. And in fact, since the planning permission was granted, or certainly around the time of the application, things have already changed in the local area. And that would include, for example, the controlled parking being introduced into Montrose Avenue. And it would also include the borough-wide rollout of the 20-mile-an-hour limit. So it was already the case in Hospital Bridge Road that there was a local 20-mile-an-hour zone around Bishop Perrin School. But since, I say, in the last couple of years, the full borough-wide 20 mph limit has been installed, and that's actually been demonstrated to result, or it's helped to reduce speeds in the area. What the highway obligations include are the requirement to extend the 20-mile-an-hour zone that is around Bishop Perrin School to include the frontage of the new school as well. So effectively, it just provides an extra reinforcement that the speed limit is 20 miles an hour in that area. And there are also proposals for double yellow lines on Hospital Bridge Road and Montrose Avenue on the corners, particularly to assist with sight lines and to discourage parking in inappropriate locations. There's a requirement, as people may well know, for a new pedestrian access on the Heathfield recreation ground, or near the Heathfield recreation ground, and that was required to reduce and try and minimise the amount of activity that there would be on the Hospital Bridge Road frontage, and it was a key component of the application. There's a requirement as well for the developer to make contributions to enable an uplift in the bus services and the capacity in the local area. And those come to just a little over £1 million in several instalments. There's also a requirement from the developer to pay a sum of funding, which was £120,000, towards improvements at the A316 Hospital Bridge roundabout, and that's a contribution that is payable to Transport for London, and I'll come back and mention a little bit more of that later. As Lucy has said, there's also a requirement for a school travel plan, and the intention is very much for the school to maintain its gold accredited travel plan, so a high quality travel plan, because it's certainly recognised that the school would need to make considerable efforts to ensure that the children and the staff are travelling to school in a safe and considerate way, and obviously also to minimise any harmful impacts as well. And that travel plan will set out targets and obligations, will be a live document and will be regularly updated. And then also the obligations include making changes to the immediate access and arrangements at the proposed junction the proposed access on Hospital Bridge Road, and that's something that we'll just come on to now. So next slide, please, Jenny. So I'll run through this in case you're unable to see it clearly. But the works effectively involve raising the carriageway to footway level across the entrance to the vehicular entrance to the school and the current garden centre, and also raising the entrances at Montrose Avenue, and that's intended there to provide added pedestrian safety and convenience, and also to result in slowing traffic and making sure traffic is slower going into those accesses. You'll notice a new stretch of footway on the school side of the road, leading to a proposed new zebra crossing there. And I'll also mention this footway a little bit later, because there is a potential long-term proposal that we can consider here as well. But the developer has proposed to provide this new piece of footway and a pedestrian crossing here, and that will allow safe access to the site, and also without actually crossing the access into the garden centre. There's additional yellow lining proposed, as I've mentioned earlier, And the other thing I would just highlight there is the proposal to fill in to improve the bus stop environment and to effectively fill in the lay-by there. The pavement is a little under 2.5 meters at that location, and to increase it by an extra 1 or 1.5 meters there will just provide improved facilities for bus operations and for the waiting pedestrians. These are works that the developer hopefully intends to complete or make a start on in the summer, so later this summer. That's obviously subject to their programme. So those are the works which are, say, a summary of the works which are necessary for the school to operate. Okay, next slide, please, Jenny. Okay, so as we said, so the works I've described so far are those which are related to the school specifically and are being delivered as part of the application and commissioned by the developer. And as we mentioned earlier, we're also considering opportunities to make further improvements in the locality, potentially, and those would be council funded, and they're ones which I will now set out. Okay, so the first thing we wanted to raise with you was a proposal to improve the Nelson Road Hospital Bridge Road junction. And this is a junction which has quite a wide, I'm sure many people know it, it has quite a wide mouth as you enter, and it's quite a long crossing location. It's something we've been concerned about or we've reviewed there's an improvement that could be delivered there for some time. And what we have is a proposed redesign that would provide a better crossing facility for pedestrians at this location. It would improve safety for all users, and again, as I mentioned earlier, it would help further reduce vehicle speeds. It's not related to the school. We say we plan their consultation on the proposed design to start on the 2nd July, maybe a few days later than that, but certainly imminently we propose to consult on this proposal. And then subject to the views that we receive from the public, works could start on site during the October half term. So next slide then, Jenny, please. Okay, so hopefully again people are able to read this, but if you have an iPad or a small computer, I'll run through it briefly. What we have is what we have proposed is a raised pedestrian crossing, a zebra crossing, as you can see just inside Hospital Bridge Road here, and to tighten up the junction mouth. It involves relocating, just slightly repositioning the bus stop and providing improved pavement space to and from the zebra crossing. And you can also hopefully make out the new path that is being proposed from the proposed zebra crossing to the existing zebra crossing, which is at Whitton Way and Collingwood Close. So I say that's really intended to just provide a safe, convenient facility for pedestrians seeking to cross the road at this point, plus the ability to also help slow down traffic as it enters into Hospital Bridge Road. So the next slide, please, Jenny. And this is the continuation of that new pathway, as I said, to lead to an upgrade to the existing crossing points at Whitton Way. Okay, thank you. Then I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the longer term ideas that we have for the road. We've commissioned consultants to undertake a corridor study of Hospital Bridge Road, and the objectives again to improve the safety on the road, to improve conditions, particularly for sustainable travel modes, and also to try and bring about environmental improvements as well. And we propose to issue a questionnaire. Again, it will be hopefully within days, but certainly hopefully within a week, and it would be a questionnaire asking residents to let us know, how you view the road, how often you use the roads, by what modes you travel, and what priorities you think are important for us to look and address. Now we do have some shorter and longer term ideas, which I'll run through now. I would just say these are not necessarily the only options or ideas, and in fact they certainly aren't. But I'll run through a few, and then we can discuss it again. Discuss it more later. So there are some possible shorter term improvements that we can consider. Those would include the removal or replacement of the guard railing that's north of the bridge, where the pavement is narrow. I will discuss this in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides' time, but it is something that we could consider. Then, whilst most of our emphasis has been in the area near the school and on the bridge, because that is where the road is narrow. Obviously, there's quite, the Hospital Bridge Road is a long road, and there are options where the road is wider to make quite substantial improvements, we think, to the pedestrian and cycling provision. And that would include near the cemetery, where again we think it's perfectly possible to fit in improved facilities for pedestrians, cyclists. You can retain some parking, also keep traffic moving, and again there are options that we could consider there if residents think that's a priority for us. Then we've noted the new and improved pedestrian crossings, including across the side roads, and all the side road entry treatments along Hospital Bridge Road and the existing crossings. Again, do residents think that they should be improved, upgraded, raised to raised so that so they're raised entry treatments as you cross the side roads. Similarly, there's a scope for enhanced signing and lining, which would highlight the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. And then possibly more of a medium-term option, but do residents have a view on replacing the roundabout arrangement at Montrose Avenue? So where you currently have an in and out at Montrose Avenue, would residents like the idea of a more simple T junction there, where you could provide some more space for pedestrians at that location, but you can maintain traffic flow quite comfortably, probably. Okay, next slide, please, Jenny. So then, I just wanted to mention some of the potential options for creating more space near and over the bridge, which is obviously where a lot of the local concerns arise. It is possible to look at some traffic management options. As I said before, these are not necessarily exclusive, and residents might have other views on this, but it could potentially be possible to consider having just a single traffic lane over the bridge, and which was signal controlled, allowing northbound vehicles to go and then southbound vehicles to go. There's a possibility perhaps for one-way working in parts of Hospital Bridge Road and School Street, which there are several school streets already in Richmond, and these are streets where at the school arrival and departure times we try and limit the extent to which through traffic can go past the school options. Could go past the school gates. So these are options that could create additional opportunity for wider footways and greater space for cycling. But as we say there as well, they do risk additional traffic queuing and displacement. And so again, I think we'd be very interested to know what residents' views are on these sorts of measures. And then if we just move on to the next slide, please, Jenny. And this really says is a sort of alternative, really, in that we can consider traffic management options, but we can also consider physical options. to try and improve the movement of pedestrians and cyclists along the road. And these include, as I mentioned earlier, removing the guardrail or replacing it with footway widening. So if we can see the photograph there of the existing guardrail on the bridge, I'm sure most residents know exactly where that is. Would residents support it being removed or reduced or broken up? There's a possibility of replacing it, for example, with more attractive bollards, which would allow, which wouldn't have quite as perhaps an oppressive sort of appearance. And also we have considered whether or not people would support us cutting back the vegetation there and potentially taking a small piece of widening the footway inwards there. Now I have to say that our initial discussions with residents in Everling Close is that they haven't indicated a great deal of enthusiasm for that idea. But again, we would be interested to know whether residents, what residents' views are on potentially widening the highway, the footway there, which would only be, say, half a metre or a metre or so. And then probably as a longer term option, the idea of having the new pavement and footbridge on the western side of Hospital Bridge Road, just so similar to as it is on the eastern side. And I showed earlier a plan of the proposals that the developer was doing outside the school, which has a footway on the western side near the school, a bit of new footway there. And again, it's a case of what would residents' views be on potentially extending that and building a new structure over the railway on the school side of the road. And say some of those are longer term options, but we're very interested to know what people think. I would just also highlight this on any traffic management options. They would be ones that we would consider on an experimental basis initially, so we can always potentially review, put something in and review it if that's what residents want. And all these ideas, it's very much a case of we wouldn't have to do them all at once, or any of them, or all together, or all in the short term. But they are options that we could hold and bring forward at later dates as well. And with that, I think I think that was the last slide, Jenny. Just have a look. Oh yes, sorry, the A316. So as I mentioned earlier, the developer has proposed or is required to make a contribution to Transport for London for improvements to the A316 junction. That's quite a modest sum of £120,000, which would bring about improvements to the lines and signs and the guard railing and the safety features at the junction. But the council is I think keen that we could do something a bit more ambitious there, and so we have commissioned consultants to draw up plans for the junction, and those are hopefully will be completed by the autumn, and then we can discuss those further with Transport for London. And I think there's one more, Jenny. And my colleagues have also just made sure that I raised the point that we are proposing to install cameras, not to spy on anybody, but to provide us with a new and improved data set of walking and cycling numbers and traffic volumes and air quality, and so that will help us certainly in the months and years to come to develop and manage any further traffic or highway schemes in across the borough, not just in this area. Thank you, Jenny. So in summary, the school-led delivery is ongoing. The council-led schemes are under consideration with public consultation commencing shortly, and we'd like to hear your views. Longer-term options are being explored. And of course, we do appreciate that there has been disruption whilst the school is being built, and there will continue to be some disruption. And we'll do our best to manage and mitigate that. And that's it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Lucy. I hope a useful introduction. Now, it's already stimulated a number of questions. So you have to forgive me. I don't, unless the officers are aware, the first question I have, I'm just going to have to read out because at the stage at which it was submitted, we only had captioned as an anonymous attendee, so I can't call on a specific individual at this stage. But the question was, cars dropping school children off will occupy narrow residential roads, such as Warburton Road and Springfield Road. These roads are to become congested and unsafe for residents. I think, I mean, David, I don't know whether you want to say any more on that, but I think the issue is noted within the presentation in the sense that we have a series of roads without controlled parking zone restrictions, which means that effectively the council don't have specific ability to be able to prohibit parking. So I think one of the things we're interested in hearing from residents about is whether or not, in light of the school, either before or after it comes into being, whether or not controlled parking zone requirements would be desired. Would that be fair, David?
It would, Councillor. The only other thing I would add to that is clearly the travel plan has targets for the numbers of people who should be arriving by bus and by and on foot, and the development was predicated certainly on the grounds that that's how most people would be arriving. So we would clearly be monitoring that activity as well.
Okay, thank you, David. Next, I've got Teresa Keegle. With a question on the bus lay-by. Teresa, are you unmuted? Okay. Well, the question she'd asked was, you know, with the bus stop fill-in, this in her view means the bus will stop all traffic. I mean, David and I have discussed this. I don't know whether, David, you want to say any more, but you know, Transport for London requirements and London buses requirements have altered, and as well as the pedestrian considerations, that's the rationale for the fill-in. But David, do you want to say any more?
Only that it is commonplace to have bus stops that pull in flush to the curb. They don't appear to lead to significant levels of congestion where they occur. It is also a relatively light frequency bus route, so it's not as if there's a bus there every couple of minutes. So it is something that we think can work satisfactorily. Ultimately, of course, if it didn't, we would seek to review the arrangements.
Mm. And there are other examples of such bus build-outs elsewhere on significant roads in the borough that, as you say, work functionally fine. Okay, so we've got Pablo next. Is Pablo still on the call? I feel like an LBC radio host at the moment, Pablo.
I have asked to unmute.
If Pablo is not, we'll give him a second. We'll go next to Anne Lahif.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, is that Anne?
Yes, hello. I live in Montrose Avenue. But one question is, are there any plans to improve the footpaths in Montrose Avenue? There's no doubt that many of the students will come from Whitton Station and go via Montrose Avenue to the school. The footpath repairs are badly needed here. I've spoken about it on occasions to Michael Wilson. We've had no repairs for about 40 years, and the only real repairs that were done in sort of my area of the street were when Cadent did the gas pipes. But our footpaths are treacherous. They need some investment, and it's to do as well generally.
Okay. I mean, perhaps Nick O'Donnell wants to come in here, or other relevant officer. But the way that we spend, I mean, as a council, we are spending more money than any previous council in history, Richmond Borough Council, on road and pavement repairs. But those road and pavement repairs are kind of prioritised on the basis of condition. I don't know whether we have any information on the condition of the pavements as adjudged against the others to be able to comment on directly now, or whether that's something we want to take away. Nick, do you want to say anything?
Just to say, I mentioned in a previous comment on the chat that we produce what's called detailed visual inspections of every single pavement and road, which involves a number of officers going out and looking literally at every single element of street space. The current data we have is about 4 years old. And as a result of that, we're going to do a full borough reconditioning in terms of looking at every single stretch again in the autumn. And that will certainly pick up Montrose Avenue. And if that is one of the higher end in terms of condition rating, we will certainly put that on the priority list in terms of investment.
It'd be fair to say, though, Nick, the presence of the school of itself doesn't fundamentally alter the prioritisation of pavements.
No, but what I would say is, and I think the lady made a good point, is that if the rate of deterioration varies amongst roads and pavements, so if as a result of extra use, if you like, on a particular road or pavement, it deteriorates quicker, we do have inspectors that walk around the borough and regularly monitor that, such that if that did get to a point where it wasn't quite, up at the top end of the rating, so to speak, for repairs immediately, it may well come onto that list quite quickly if that's the case. But we would certainly look at it in the first instance as it is now, and if it didn't make on the list, it'd be regularly reviewed.
Thank you. That's great. Next, I've got Caroline Esterino, who's asking a question about whether the bus stop previously referred to could not be removed completely. Caroline, do you want to say anything more about that?
It was just in reference to a question from Mary Parker a little bit earlier, saying that it's going to affect sight lines from people coming out of Montrose. So in response to that, which I agree with Mary on that, response to that was, can that just not be removed? And there is one a little bit further down past Bishop Perrin in quite close proximity and closer to another zebra crossing.
Okay, well, David, do you want to say something about that? I mean, I imagine as a start of 10, you're going to mention that these schemes are all safety audited. So, we wouldn't put in anything in that we knew to be fundamentally unsafe. And I imagine you probably want to comment on how TfL and the buses will consider a gap of a certain distance between bus use facilities.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Councillor. There's a desire for bus stops to be quite closely spaced in order that they provide the maximum benefit for pedestrians, particularly any with mobility problems who find walking to the next stop it's too difficult. As you say, the designs are safety audited and would be reviewed as well once built. So again, if there were, if we did observe anything that didn't look right, we would seek to address it. But it's certainly not. We certainly don't expect there to be a significant problem there.
Yeah, and I imagine we wouldn't have the cooperation of TfL or any of the London bus operators for the removal of that bus stop.
No, we wouldn't. No, that's correct.
Thank you. Okay. Merrow, the bridge on Hospital Bridge Road is very narrow. Have we got Merrow available?
Yes, hello there. I guess it's a question around the bridge. It's already not fit for purpose, and there's already lots of issues with it. It's not wide enough. You've got the pedestrian walkway on the north side of it. What are the plans to fix that? Because it's only going to get worse, which if you increase the bus traffic and there's more cars going to and from the school. Are there any longer term plans to fix that for everybody, really?
Yeah, thank you. Well, David, David touched on in his presentation that we're certainly looking at what we consider to be the most pressing part of that at the moment, which is the kind of pedestrian amenity, maximising what space there is where possible, and looking to enhance it. The challenge is, as I think David will touch on, that the areas outside the present highway are not in council ownership. Is that fair to say, David?
That's right, yes. I'd only add as well that the existing railway bridge and the footway bridge, they might not look to be in particularly great condition, but we're not aware that there is any significant, there isn't any structural problem with them, and so they are structurally sound.
Yeah, so the difference, but I suspect what was being said was more about the fact that they're not sort of optimized for modern traffic levels, and I think it'd be fair to say we would have preferred a different, wider structure for all mode uses, wouldn't we?
Yeah, that's right. You wouldn't build that bridge like it is if you were building it now, correct? But
an option remains to consider changes to the structure, but those changes, I think, it'd be fair to say, David, are expensive, complicated, and not certain to necessarily be deliverable. That doesn't mean that we would not pursue them, but they are certainly quite challenging things to get done.
Yeah, and I think that if residents tell us it's the most pressing need and requirement, then obviously we would give it greater consideration.
But so good feedback to hear that, if that is what residents are keen to see happen. So we've got Claire Groves, I think, on pedestrian crossings after the bus stop.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Yes, it's quite a dangerous road just to cross at the moment. The cars speed up and down that bridge, and they pay little attention to when a bus is stopped, and actually with the oncoming traffic. So actually, if you're thinking about putting a pedestrian crossing after the bus stop, this is the opposite side to Bishop Heron, it feels incredibly dangerous. The cars just don't seem to look. So
okay.
Can
yeah.
You know, what alternatives are there?
Let me just, can I just ask something of you? I mean, do you see an obvious alternative? I'm not, you know, if you don't, fine. I'm not seeking to sort of put you on the spot. I'm just interested in whether you have a preference for a different outcome.
I think a traffic light, a visual stop would be helpful, rather than just small children. You know, 11-year-olds quite often don't get seen, you know, when they're waiting to cross. So something visual would be helpful.
Okay. Okay.
You know, a separation of a bus stop. You know, the bus stop does not have to be on that little patch. It feels too small to accommodate a pedestrian crossing and a bus stop. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So David, do you want to say anything about both those points, about the proximity and about the sort of choice of crossing as opposed to perhaps a signalized crossing?
Well, a zebra crossing generally has the advantage in that it provides immediate priority for the pedestrian arriving at it, whereas if you have a signalized crossing, you risk having a queue of people waiting, and potentially people who are not prepared to wait as well. So, and in terms of its deliverability, you know, the zebra seems to be, you know, as I said, it seems to work fine. Obviously, they would be Belisha beaconed, and there are plans for additional warning signage and flashing lights as well, school warning lighting. So there would be additional, you know, other additional measures along the road to highlight the presence of the school. Okay,
David, just on that, would outdated concept though it may seem to many, because we don't have very many, but would the school be in a position, or the council, to provide, for example, a lollipop person or such at the location? Do you know?
It's something that we can consider.
Okay, well, that's I mean, that's sort of an interim step between formalisation. So I just wonder whether perhaps we can reflect on that too. Okay, thank you. So next we've got David Willis. We've got restrictions on HBR likely to increase traffic on the side roads. How will we manage that? Do you want to say anything further on that, David?
Only
sorry, before you do, David, Tidley, I should say, does David Willis have anything he wants to add to the sentence?
I think he's left.
Okay, David Tidley, please go on.
Well, only that we highlighted, Councillor, that is a risk. You know, any measures that we consider that would have an impact in terms of the amount of traffic on Hospital Bridge Road does risk it being displaced to other areas. Although some evidence of most traffic reduction schemes is that some traffic just does disappear. It just does effectively evaporate away. But I suppose what would be interested through the questionnaire is to find out again very much from residents about what priority they put on traffic reduction being pursued along Hospital Bridge Road. You know, in the context that may then could potentially increase traffic in the surrounding streets.
Okay, thank you, David. So Kate P next, I think, commenting on the you know, one of the outline ideas that you shared, which was a single traffic lane, and her suggestion that it would cause huge traffic jams. Kate, do you want to say anything further on that briefly? But do you want to say anything
Yeah, I mean, it's really just that when there have been roadworks in the area, the whole area gets jammed up. There are people trying to go in different directions around the side roads. And that in itself is a danger. So if that were going to come in as a long-term solution, then I think that would cause all sorts of problems.
So it's your feeling then, Kate, that we need to, as a council, find proposals that make the road safer for the pedestrians and particularly school children going about their business, but also still kind of enable the present use, the two directions of travel.
Yeah, ideally, you talk about ideally you'd widen the bridge. I kind of think that I mean, I get that's probably not a feasible suggestion, but that's really where you want to be going, so that you can accommodate the traffic and also pedestrians as well.
Okay, thank you. No, I mean, it's useful feedback. I wouldn't say, and I don't think, David, you would say that, you know, a bridge expansion is unfeasible. It just is a significant expenditure, and there are, you know, legal and other hurdles to be overcome, ownership hurdles to be overcome, which probably mean that it isn't a short-term solution. It's not going to be a day one solution for when the school comes into operation, but that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't pursue it. Would that be fair, David?
No, that's absolutely right. And whether it was widening the existing structure or providing a footbridge, a footbridge on the western side. Okay,
so I think Nick O'Donnell is answering a question in written form from the next question I had. So I'll move to Sarah Corney, who's got a question about the guardrail. Sarah, do you want to ask your question?
Hi there.
Hi.
I walk along that path at least once a day to go and collect my daughter from Bishop Perrin School. And at the moment, traffic does speed along there, doing more than 20 miles an hour, and you feel quite unsafe. So removing the guardrail would just be awful, in my opinion, because children and adults are just a few inches from the traffic.
I mean, that's really useful feedback for us. I would, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, I would observe a couple of things about it too, though. I mean, one is I think that the guardrail performs two functions, and one of them far better than the other. And I'll let David come in if I misspeak on this. But one is that it obviously provides a barrier which stops people going into the carriageway. But I think for many people, guardrails thought about as more of a kind of barrier to protect them as pedestrians from vehicles. And there's, you know, sort of mixed evidence out there that, you know, if you get hit by a car impacts a guardrail, that the guardrail can actually cause more damage than the car impacting on a pedestrian itself. So I think the benefit, as I would observe it in this location, is more for keeping pedestrians within the pedestrian footway rather than the other way around. Though I can understand the reassurance it may seem to provide, but I guess I just wonder whether or not, David, you've got any reflections on whether or not through different materials, more aesthetically pleasing, maybe even freeing up more space, which obviously is critical, you can provide a similar or better level of safety for pedestrians?
Yes, that's exactly it, Councillor. That there may be options involving bollards rather than a long line of guard railing, and also to consider the road in a wider context. That if we do provide a raised crossing point towards Nelson Road and additional signs and lines and other speed reduction measures along there, then that might again mean that the guard railing, the need for it can be reconsidered in the round rather than its own scheme.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know if Nick O'Donnell wanted to add something, but I wouldn't want to.
Yeah, Nick, do you want to add anything on the guardrail?
No, I think it's largely been covered. I mean, the point I would make is that we've looked at other design options, and everyone's got their own sort of ideas and preference. What I would say is there are more attractive and equally effective measures. And for one we looked at around a school was called pencil bollards, where they are sort of tall static bollards, but they're sort of coloured, and because they accentuate the fact that you are near a school. It's actually had quite a profound effect in slowing cars down, and it's something we've mentioned to local councillors. But obviously there are lots of ways of looking at it, and I can completely understand there isn't concerns about the removal of guardrail altogether. And given the width there, I think we're talking about perhaps more alternatives than full removal at this stage.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits that we'd be looking for ideally would be, with any change, would not be just enhancing the aesthetics and the safety, but also gaining some footway space because of the narrowness of that area, which I think adds to the kind of claustrophobia and the sense of imperiled feeling when the most traffic's passing by. Okay, let's get to some other questions. So we've got Juanita. Juanita, are you available to put your brief question to us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, hello, thank you very much. I own a property on Gosling Road, which is part of the triangle that some of the other participants have mentioned, Springfield, Warburton, Cobbett, Gosling, which are very severely constrained in a number of respects, in respect of the fact that the occupants on those roads are very, very dependent on street parking for the most part. The roads are single-threaded because they're dependent on on-street parking. You can only do one-way traffic for most of the time, which means you end up with cars waiting to be able to go in one or other direction. And the entrance to this triangle off Hospital Bridge Road is very constrained. So I must object, and I do find the responses on this matter to be wholly inadequate. And they does not appear.
Can I just check, Juanita? So what
Yes.
is it you specifically object to?
No, what I'm concerned about is the fact that there's very high traffic in this triangle, which is a dead-end triangle from cars already at school drop-off times and school pick-off times. Cars all come into these side roads and sit waiting, so they take up parking spaces, they park in people's driveways, they park in the road, they idle, they create plenty issues for the existing occupants, in addition to the fact that they take up parking which is already very restricted. So if it's correct, what I'm understanding, that little to no attention has been given to the constraints and the practicalities in this particular triangle, I must raise this as a serious concern.
Okay, well, thank you. I think my reflection on that is, unless officers have anything specific about the location, is that we have prescribed policy relating to petitioning for controlled parking zones. I'm assuming the area concerned has not presently got controls on it, certainly not controls that affect the behaviours that you've described. And clearly, if residents of the roads concerned were to petition us in favour of a controlled parking zone consultation, then that's something we'd be able to do. Mick, do you want to say anything further about that?
Yes, sorry, just to mute myself. Yes, that's correct. I mean, the area doesn't have controls, and it may be something that we need to look at. I mean, the existing controlled zone, as mentioned earlier, stops at the end of Montrose Avenue, and that will be reviewed this year. So that might mean that we look at the issues around this area. It really comes down to, obviously, the need for the controls, and of course consultation that we would carry out in the area. So if that's what you would like us to do, a petition is the way forward, but we can certainly consider what improvements can be made, and if it would give obviously, and that would look to give priority to local residents.
Is there a side?
And I think, sorry, forgive me, we can't take supplementaries because I want to get through others, but what I'll simply observe is that even with that, of course, a controlled parking zone doesn't guarantee the removal of the various issues that you've described. There are sadly a number of schools in this borough which are surrounded by controlled parking zones where we still have behaviours by some minority of parents who obviously behave in ways that still are non-compliant and cause challenges. But as Mick says, there's a process, and we'll continue to evaluate whether or not we think the area warrants action too. But certainly, if residents are particularly motivated to see the introduction of a CPZ, then petitioning us is certainly the way to go. Next on the list, I had Nick Dexter, but I'm not going to take this question, Nick, because you're asking questions about admissions policy, which frankly are completely out of the scope of the conversation we're having today. As I said, we're not reliving the sort of planning stipulations or the citing of the school or its admissions policy. So you'll have to forgive me for bringing in others who obviously have questions more relevant to the transport agenda of this. Lynn Barnes, are you available next?
Hello.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi. Hello. The second question that I've asked that you're referring to, which is where I live in Stirling Road, and turning out of Stirling Road, especially turning left onto Hospital Bridge Road, you have to swing quite far into Hospital Bridge Road to do that turn. At the moment, there's the bus stop slightly to the left. There's contractor vehicles that park opposite the exit to Stirling Road. How is that going to feature in plans going ahead to make that safer for the residents of Stirling Road turning out into Hospital Bridge Road, taking into account at school times there's going to be more traffic?
Okay, thank you, Lynn. David, is that one for you? You feel you're best placed to answer that, or at least reflect on it?
Yeah, I can certainly reflect on it. As I mentioned, we are undertaking the study of Hospital Bridge Road, which will be looking at the turnings in and out of it. So we would pick it up in the round, but by it being raised specifically in this in this forum, I can take that away, and we can go out on site and actually make sure we investigate that particular issue.
Very useful. So we'll take that away and see whether there's more that can or should be done in relation to that point. Next, I've got Karen Devereux.
Oh, hello. Yes, I'm a local resident, but I've also will have 2 children at school. So my concern is the traffic approaching from the Nelson Road junction. How will the cars know that they need to slow down for the zebra crossing, because it's after a blind bend? I know you've mentioned there'll be flashing warning lights, but I walk past there quite often at the moment, and the cars, they don't all slow to 20. So I'm very, very concerned about my children using a crossing by the school.
Okay, David, do you want to reflect on that point?
Can I just confirm that was the proposed new crossing on?
Yes, the one opposite the end of Montrose. So I live at the other end of Montrose, near the station end, but I would actually tell my children to use the crossing by Bishop Perrin, because I don't think the new one is going to be safe because of the cars not slowing down sufficiently. Okay. Well, it has been a concern that has been raised, but so we have this. Well, the developer has designed it in accordance with appropriate standards, and coupled with speed reduction and safety auditing, it is compliant with, considered compliant with regulations. Clearly, when the school opens, we will have people on site, and I'm sure the school will also have staff on site that will be closely observing how that arrangement works.
I guess as well, to add to that, David, I mean, that's why the kind of third part of the 3 parts I described earlier is very much about whether or not there are supplementary measures here that can help to strengthen the measures that are already proposed. So, if there's things we can be doing that will reduce speeds of vehicles in the area, then that clearly can assist the measures that are already in place. But I mean, interesting reflections that personally you're not an enthusiast for the design of the crossing. We'll take that on board, have another look at it certainly. But as David says, these have been designed to national and London standards and are thought compliant.
Maybe
Christine Hallett next.
Oh,
sorry, I can't.
Okay.
I'm saying that
Sorry,
Lisa had a hand up.
I can't take the supplementaries because I'm conscious we've got half an hour left and still got 18 unanswered questions. So forgive me. If you want to follow up afterwards, please send myself and David Tidley an email. Very happy to kind of continue the conversation.
No, Lisa Fenn has Lisa Fenn had
okay, yeah, Lisa, yeah, okay, we've got an officer with an intervention on this too.
Hi, thank you. Yep, my name is Lisa Fenn. I'm in the traffic team. I just wanted to say that we are also looking at increased signage on the approach to that bridge, and in addition to anti-skid surfacing that will be a different colour to the road surface, and the wigwag signs that are currently by Montrose will be moved down to Binkham or possibly further to really create that kind of gateway effect before you hit the bridge.
Thank you, Lisa. I mean, good detail to provide. So there's sort of a recognition that, yeah, it's not simply just citing a crossing there. It's about making sure that the approaches to it are much more visible and therefore do promote much higher levels of compliance than presently are the case. Kirsty Hallett, we've got next.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
I sent you in 3 questions. However,
yeah, can you try and neatly
yes,
wrap into one?
I can. I apologize for forgetting there was the crossing already by Bishop Perrin, which I think is really the only one you should be having. Why do you have a problem with the children crossing into or crossing where the nursery is, across the front of the nursery? Because I believe that is far worse than crossing on the zebra crossing on just at the Humpback Bridge. I mean, I think that's madness, to be honest. And putting another one on the other side is even worse.
David, do you want to?
Yeah, I didn't quite understand.
I think my understanding was, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Hallett, is that you are more in favour of a crossing by the nursery than where it presently is. Is that correct?
Well, past Montrose, certainly.
Yeah.
And allowing the children only to avoid having to walk across over the bridge at all, as it is at the moment, I think is a disaster. As I say, you only have to sit at the lights down by the other school and watching kids coming out of school, and you know how they mess about. Well, I think that's a dreadful idea, having them crossing at the bottom of that Humpback Bridge on a tiny narrow road where there's lots of cars at various, morning and evening.
Okay.
I live round the corner, basically.
Sure.
And I've been
so David,
millions of times.
Yeah, thank you. So David, Lisa, did you want to reflect on that?
Only that I think we have covered it to a certain extent in previously, but the only other thing I would add is that there will be some children coming from the north, so they will be walking over the footbridge over the railway, and they would almost naturally wish to cross at that location, whether there's a crossing there or not. And so there is a, as I said, that crossing would provide a safe option at that location.
For that reason, can I just say?
No, really, I can't allow supplementaries. No, please.
No, it's just a comment. You must work on getting the width on the pavement then. Absolutely.
Okay.
Priority.
Absolutely understood. But I'm conscious I should treat everybody equally in terms of not having too much airtime on this. Marianne Leduc, I've got next. Is Marianne available?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yeah.
Hi, hello there. Yeah, I'm a resident of Hospital Bridge Road, and one of the questions I actually have is to do with the islands. Now, obviously they're there for a reason, but it is very apparent that already, and this is before the school's obviously been built, residents and myself are obviously using the main road to park. However, it seems like there is a lot of cars that park very close to the island. And that causes visual impairment when I'm crossing the road to take my daughter or whoever across just to the other side of the road. So what's invariably happening now is that because there's kind of no limit, you're just relying on the driver to park, you know, hopefully not too close to the island. But because they're not, what's happening is you're getting these huge vehicles, essentially, and buses, Royal Mail, massive lorries that are almost using the island like a chicane. Okay, so you've gone from having the island to be there as a safety aspect, and now what's happening is they're using a chicane as a chicane to avoid the car that's parked near the island, and then subsequently they are mounting the curb, they're mounting the pavement. So outside my house is a massive hole where the vehicles have basically, like I say, gone onto the pavement to avoid the car near the island, but also to avoid the island. Now, you know, the council's fixed the pavement, but the point I'm trying to make is that this is affecting me as a resident, but think about the traffic flow of children walking down. And honestly, I am very concerned for this. So this really, please, would be my top priority.
Sure. And before I bring in an officer, probably Lisa or David on this, I mean, just to ask you, Marianne, on this, would you, because I note that one of your other questions that you've asked elsewhere about the potential cycle facilities and the impact that might have on reduction of parking. I mean, is your view, therefore, that, you know, we need to do something in terms of treatment to restrict parking from around the areas concerned? Is that the solution? Because clearly that will have an impact on parking availability.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? You know, you're kind of wanting the parking there, but also at the same time, the parking needs to be done, you know, held in a safe manner. But at the moment, you know, if you mentioned about the cycling lanes, that would be fantastic. You know, I'm all for cycling lanes, but again, you've got to think already there's going to be a huge, you know, congestion of people, residents just trying to park in the area, to then eat into that on top of cycle lanes. I think it's going to bottleneck, to be honest.
Okay, well, I mean, these are the types of feedback we want to hear. I think one of the things, you know, that is difficult to predict in many of these cases is if you build alternative capacity, is the degree to which substitution occurs in relation to those local journeys. But clearly, Hospital Bridge Road has traffic associated with it, which doesn't relate to the schools, and the likelihood of a lorry driver replacing their journey with a bicycle is naught. But Lisa, David, do you want to comment on the specifics of the treatment around the islands?
Only to say, I haven't had this raised with me before in all my time at the council, so I can only imagine it's become worse recently. So I would suggest that David's consultants might need to look at it as part of the corridor study. And I don't know, maybe the answer is to remove the islands and look at alternatives to try and ensure we don't lose parking. But over to you, David.
No, I'm happy to take that away and consider it, as you say, Lisa. Yeah.
I think the things we have to consider in light of what's been said is, you know, I mean, I don't want to necessarily default to removal, because I don't think that necessarily aligns with the feedback we just heard there, which was that they're an amenity that Miss Leduc felt was useful. But we do need to see whether there are specific issues around car parking that's making them unsafe facilities. So we'll have to look at the options. Okay, we've got Paul Harrington next. Paul available?
I was unmuted, so I've unmuted.
Great. No, yeah, we can hear you, Paul.
Fine. I just want to pick up on the statement in the presentation. I thought rather a throwaway statement about the effect of queuing and displacement. As you can see, I'm concerned about the rat running effect. Hospital Bridge Road down to Percy Road can be quite a cut through, and still is quite a cut through. When the recent Hospital Bridge Road was closed, traffic coming along there was cutting through Ashley Drive. Very dangerous for the children and parents going, and the residents going, concerned with the Bishop Perrin School. So, you know, I'd like to know what impact study has been made on the effect of the side roads. It obviously affects the other side of the road as well, but cutting down from Hospital Road to Percy Road to the High Street to have an alternative route through is going to increase. I'd like to know what's going to be happening about monitoring the effect of this. There's going to be congestion on Hospital Bridge Road. We accept that. There will be congestion. It's going to throw traffic onto the side roads. There's a possibility And I've also included there lateral running along Rycroft Avenue, parents who might come up Montrose Avenue, dump their child fairly close to the school, and then shoot along Rycroft back to Percy Road. So there will be quite an impact on the Montrose estate. So I'd like to know what studies have been made beforehand about the potential impact. It's happened, okay, let's get on with it, but what are you going to do about monitoring traffic in the area?
So David, do you want to comment, or does Lucy? I mean, clearly in relation to the planning application, there will have been assessments made about potential transport movements. I think you referenced that the parking elements relating to the school are yet to come back to the planning committee, and that we're undertaking some monitoring of traffic volumes as well in the location. Are those the main points?
Yes, as part of the transport assessment, there was detailed monitoring of the existing traffic flows and movements. As part of the implementation of the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit as well, there's measurements on traffic volumes in the area. Obviously, there's also been the impact of the pandemic on flows, which has actually resulted in a rather atypical sort of situation in the last few months. And then going forward, we will be undertaking additional monitoring, both as part of the monitoring of the school travel plan and the extra sort of camera monitoring that I mentioned earlier. So we will be able to, say, adequately monitor how things are going.
Okay, thank you, David. Next, I've got John Rolls. John available?
Hi, I live in the Hospital Bridge Road. I noticed that cars going towards the bridge, as they go over the traffic hump outside Bishop Perrin School, a considerable number just accelerate as hard as possible. And if there's not some traffic calming put in between Bishop Perrin and the new Turing House School entrance, you're going to have cars just travelling too fast. And it's basically antisocial driving. But looking at these current plans, it's not going to be strong enough to slow them down. I feel that you need to look at something like a speed table outside Stirling Road.
Okay, well, thanks for the feedback, John. I just one question, John, though, related. I mean, I've heard it tonight about congestion on the road and about speed. I mean, you clearly can't have both at the same time. So is it your view that at the times where the school is there, that this speeding situation will occur, or is it outside the school hours that is more likely to be the case?
What the problem on the road is, it's the through traffic. It's because it's the B358. It's the traffic lights at Nelson Road and at Hospital Bridge Road. They sort of create a convoy situation. So most of the traffic goes through quite slow, but then there's a gap and you get people like zoom off and take advantage of the clear road. And the congestion tends to be more traffic closer to the A316. We don't get it's the bridge tends to be quite clear, and that's what allows the speed to occur.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I understand speed is your primary concern. What are officer thoughts on the points made there and the proposal for I think it was a raised table near Stirling?
Is this something I believe the consultants might be looking at? Just in terms of the crossing outside the school, that isn't actually going to be raised because it was on part of the gradient of the bridge, and as such, design standards don't allow for raised features on a downward gradient of the bridge because for safety reasons it's not permitted. So if we're going to look at traffic calming, it would kind of be on the approach, and as John said, around the Stirling Road junction. But I would expect that the consultants could potentially look at that as part of their corridor study.
Well, so I think useful input. And yeah, David.
I think Nick had his hand up.
Oh, forgive me, I am not able to see that. Nick, do you want to say something further on this?
Apologies, I just wanted to add to the comment, and I think there were very reasonable comments made in relation to concern there. It's something I've observed certainly out there. And what I would say is that there are kind of a multitude of measures that can be brought into aid with speed concerns. We've talked about speed indicated devices, which come in different formats. In simple terms, that's kind of where you see the kind of flashing signs saying, 20 or whatever it may be. We do work with the police in terms of speed enforcement and community speed watch events. There are physical measures. I know that Lisa's mentioned that there are some limitations to that. And just to say that, we're also keen moving into the sort of medium term to look at ways that the borough can take on its own enforcement powers. It's something that we believe is possible. And something that we are exploring and something we'd like to bring forward as a trial. So we don't have powers to implement speed cameras as it stands, but in the future we may be able to. So that there are various tools that can be looked at. I think the most important thing, as mentioned by the gentleman, is that we do monitor those concerns and those hotspot areas and make sure that, if they're not being satisfactorily addressed in terms of speed, that we try and come up at least with some short-term mitigation whilst we try and bring in the longer-term effects.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, next I've got Eric Gilston.
Hello?
Is Eric? Yeah, Eric, go on, please ask your question.
Okay, a lot of the things I want to talk about have all been covered, but I'm a resident in Montrose Avenue, and something which hasn't been covered, a thought. Is there a possibility of closing off Montrose Avenue from Hospital Bridge Road so it's one-way traffic coming out of Montrose into Hospital Bridge Road? So that will avoid the traffic using Montrose as a through road or for parking when it's school time.
Okay, thank you. David, do you want to say anything on that, or any other officers for that matter?
Only that if the gentleman wants us to investigate that, then by all means suggest it, during the questionnaire. But it isn't something that we're aware has been any groundswell of support for the idea. But if it wishes, if it's suggested, it's something that we can consider. I did mention that that there is a possibility of turning the junction of Montrose and Hospital Bridge Road into a T junction, but that wasn't intended to provide it as a one-way system.
Thank you. So last questions that I've got are from Anne Laheath and Teresa Keegal, who I think have both already asked questions. So in bringing in each of you in turn, if I could ask you to be brief, please. Anne, could you go first?
Yeah, the question Eric has just asked, I'm the person that got CPZ for the Montrose estate and Jubilee and Pauline. And it's one of the questions that when I meet residents now, they say, because they think I have something to do with the council when I don't, but they ask me, why can't we have Montrose as a one-way street when the school opens? Because we already have serious problems with traffic.
Well, I think as David has said, if there is widespread support for it, and after evaluation by officers off the back of that, we believe it's possible to operate it without causing significant displacement effects elsewhere, that that we don't feel are able to be mitigated against. It's certainly a possibility, but I think as we're hearing tonight, certainly my case, I've never received any correspondence directly about one-waying the road concerned, and so in the last 3 years I haven't. You may have been hearing about it, but I certainly haven't. Teresa Keegal.
She's gone.
Okay, so we went to that, and Nick was writing a response to Janet Goddard, but if that response hasn't gone in, I'm very happy to take Janet's. Janet has responded, so I assume Janet's question is closed off. Therefore, Janet, unless you've got anything further to add.
Yeah, no, I'm good. I've just been talking the whole time in the right hand side and getting answers as I've been going, so I'm good.
Fine. That's good. You know, you don't have to hear it all verbally. If you get the answers in a written form, just good. And the only question has been submitted pretty late just now that I've seen is from Manoj Taylor, asking whether Montrose could become a one-way street, which I think we've just covered. If there's widespread support for changes like that, then clearly the best way of doing progressing that is to demonstrate that through the forthcoming questionnaire that's coming out, and also to perhaps get together a petition or similar sort of list of support for such a change, and then we'll be in a position as a council to evaluate it. But we're 8 minutes shy of the hard stop, and I think, to the best of my knowledge, I've got all of the questions that have been put answered by myself's officers or in written correspondence. So for those of you still on this meeting, thank you very much for your input. I think this is part of a conversation. This is not a one-off event. It's been very useful to me, and I hope to officers to hear some of the points that have been made. I hope you feel that there is a plan for taking actions that we have already, that we are, and that we are considering, and that we want to involve you very much in that process to make sure that this school functions as best it can, as safely and effectively for both users of the school, students of the school, but also local residents. And there are a whole range of issues that have been raised tonight that have been extremely useful. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the officers' time. Thank you especially to the ward councillors for their effort in bringing this meeting about and involving themselves in this debate so thoroughly. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening following a victorious English victory against the German football team earlier today. Thank you.